Frazzeldow's Horribly Dreadful Tales. The Sprite, Chapter 1. My name is Frazzeldow, and this is not my story to tell, but alas, I am the only one left to tell it. There is much debate in the fantastical world regarding the difference between a fairy and a sprite, mostly made by those who have never met a sprite. Though fairies are quite common in the cities of elves and dwarves, sprites are rarely, if ever, seen outside of the forest. In fact, sprites are so rarely seen, some have even come to question if they even exist at all. This, of course, is purely ridiculous. In fact, when you get down to it, fairies and sprites are quite different. The first difference you will notice is that fairy's skin is flesh-toned, whereas sprite's skin is shades of green. Secondly, where fairies are fueled by pure arcane magic, sprites are fueled by nature and the magic governing the growing things of this world. Thirdly, since fairies interact with many of the other races of this world, they are generally well versed in all of their languages. Sprites, however, being the reclusive beings they are, know very little of the languages outside of the forest. In fact, when they're in their own villages, nestled deep in the forests, they communicate telepathically through images and feelings. The story I have set out to tell you today involves a particularly inquisitive little sprite, a trait not common among her kin. Since sprites don't have names per se, a sprite's identity mainly being conveyed between each other through appearance and a sense of self. And seeing as only the one sprite partakes in the adventure, I will refer to it as Sprite or Little Sprite, where appropriate. This tale begins quite peacefully, our little sprite basking in the sun, lying on a log next to a stream, soaking in and in turn mingling with the energies of the forest around it. Sitting next to the sprite was a being seemingly made out of vines woven together to form the shape of a person. I have done much research into what that creature was, but given the nature of sprightly knowledge and the remoteness of the forest in which they live, I have been unable to ascertain its origin. Regardless, both it and the sprite, on this beautiful day, sat enjoying the wonders of nature, as they often did. Around midday, the sprite and its topiary companion were disturbed by a loud crash from the forest as a large horse-drawn wagon hurtled into the opening and skidded to a halt in front of them. "Hello there, little sprite," the driver said cheerfully. "And hello to you too, viney thinger." Startled, but curious, the sprite floated over to the man. He seemed to be human, but that was quite unusual, as humans did not usually find themselves this far into the forest, especially humans with wagons, as there aren't any roads and very few pathways this far in. "Hello, human?" the sprite said haltingly. It should be mentioned here that since the dawn of time, the earth has been split into two landmasses, separated by a vast and unyielding ocean. On one side, the dwarven and elven races live, and on the other, the races of men. It is said that the dwarves and elves have hated man since the beginning of time, and that feeling is mutual. So it was quite odd indeed to see a human on this side of the ocean, let alone this far into a forest. "I seem to be lost," the driver said. "You wouldn't happen to know the way out of this damnable forest, would you?" The smile never left his face, but I wish that day the sprite had noticed that it didn't touch his eyes. "I was just leaving," the vined creature told the man. "I would be happy to show you the way out." "That would be wonderful," the driver exclaimed, "and to show my appreciation, I have a gift for your little friend." The driver rummaged around his exceptionally disorganized cart until he found a ring and handed it to the sprite. The ring was very plain, but perfectly round, so perfectly round in fact that the sprite found itself lost in its curves, mesmerized by its simple beauty. It was so lost in the ring that when it looked up, the man and its friend were gone. To my knowledge, that creature that so gently played with my dear sprite that day was never seen again. I wish I could tell you it left that place and lived a happy life, but I cannot. Though I would like to believe that vine creature simply lived out its life away from any who could give its location, it is much more likely that it met its end that day, and for that I am truly saddened. So the sprite, thinking nothing amiss, slipped the ring around its wrist and started home. This part of the story, as related to me by the sprite, is a little fuzzy, as if viewed through a couple glasses of wine. There is nowhere in the forest that the little sprite did not know. The sprite was of the forest, and its energies flowed through it. However, at some point on the little sprite's trip home, it found itself in a place wholly unfamiliar to it. The forest that night felt suddenly wrong, its energies wild and unfettered, as if there were no one tending it. Undeterred, the sprite pressed on, confident things would work out for the best. There is very little reason to back up the sprite's blind optimism. In fact, situations like the one the sprite now found itself in rarely end well. Eventually, after pushing on through seemingly endless, and perhaps more disturbingly lifeless forest, the sprite came upon a castle. It is important to note here that sprites' dwellings are not built per se. When a sprite needs a home, they befriend a tree and then ask it politely to grow a home in its branches. In fact, most forest dwellers make their structures in a similar fashion. Forest elves, for example, are well known to be master tree weavers, the only exception being forest dwarves, who, being more proficient in stone magic than forest magic, shape their homes out of stone and moss. The castle the sprite came upon was not built in any of these ways. It was built in the fashion of men. For men, building starts with destruction, the chopping down of trees and chiseling of stones, for destruction is in their nature. The castle seemed to be made out of large stones that had been hacked and chiseled into blocks interspersed with yellowish glowing stones that appeared to be magical in nature. The structure was roughly square, had 2 stories, and 4 turrets, one at each corner. In the center of the castle, a giant spire shot up into the sky, but since it was dark by this time, the sprite could not tell how tall it was. I wish sprites were less trusting creatures. I wish this world was a less cruel place. I wish my little sprite had taken the wrongness in that forest and the ominous feeling of that tower as the ill omens that they were, and it had fled far and fast from that place. Then I may never have met my sprite, and surely would not be telling this story. Curious, the sprite drew closer to the castle, and heard music coming from within. Sprites love music. If you were to, by some odd circumstance, stumble upon a sprites community deep in the forest, there is a very good chance you would catch them dancing to the music of the trees. There is also a good chance that you would not be able to hear the music of the trees, because it takes a special ear and an affinity for nature to catch the notes trees produce. So sprites are inexorably drawn to music, and our little sprite nearly floated in through a window. But that wouldn't be polite. So, instead, the sprite went up to the door and gave a loud knock. Now, given the size difference between a sprite and a door built to accommodate humans, a loud knock is more accurately described as a series of tackles. The man that answered the door wore a mask made to look like a laughing boar. "Hello, little sprite," the man said. "We've been expecting you." If ever in life you are confronted with a man in a mask telling you that he's been expecting you, I'd advise not going with him. The likelihood of that encounter ending well is slim. My poor little sprite, however, entered without a second thought. Inside the antechamber, there were 2 women. One with a mask made to look like a laughing cat, and the other a mask made to look like a laughing squirrel. In recounting this story to me, my dear sprite could not account for the preternatural ease it felt when being confronted by such strange things. "You can't go to the party dressed like that," the laughing cat said. "We must get you changed," the laughing squirrel said, almost cutting off the laughing cat. Sprite clothing is made of finely woven plant fibers, and while comfortable, are not what many would describe as the height of fashion. So, when the laughing cat pulled a beautiful pale blue silk dress with sapphires sewn into it, the sprite couldn't contain its excitement. "It's so pretty," the sprite exclaimed, "and so soft," it added, stroking the hem of the dress. "It was made just for you," the laughing squirrel said. In the retelling of the story, my dear sprite stopped here to say that the woman's voice sounded hollow, though it hadn't noticed it at the time, as if it too were just a mask. Once the sprite had donned its new dress, it was led down a corridor to a great hall directly in the middle of the castle, and when it entered, everyone assembled gave out a loud cheer. The sprite didn't know what to make of that. It had never had so many eyes on it at one time, and it began to blush in embarrassment. "Welcome to your party, little sprite," a woman in a laughing fox mask said. "My party?" said the sprite in confusion. "Why on earth would you be throwing a party for me?" "Why, because you are a very important sprite," the smiling fox said. "Maybe the most important sprite that ever there was." "Not me," the sprite protested. "I am nothing special, just a lost little sprite." "How can you be lost when you are exactly where you should be?" the laughing fox said. In hindsight, my dear sprite admits that this makes no sense at all, but so entranced by the wonder of the evening it was that it seemed perfectly logical at the time. "Well," the sprite said, "if the party is for me, then let's dance." To this, everyone cheered and started dancing and laughing, and the sprite floated up above their heads to dance. To anyone else, I think, the synchronicity of the people gathered there would have been a warning that all was not well. However, the sprite knew little of humans and their individualistic nature, so it felt nothing amiss. On and on the sprite danced, until it felt it could dance no more, and exhausted it fluttered up to the grand chandelier to watch everyone else in their revelry. It was then that the sprite noticed that off in a corner there was a man who, so severe was his brooding, seemed to emanate shadow from himself. This did not sit well with the sprite, so it fluttered over to the man. When the sprite got closer, it noticed that, unlike the smiling animal masks the rest of the partygoers wore, the man's mask seemed to be a snarling demon. "Why don't you dance with everyone else?" the sprite asked, settling down next to the man. "It is not my way to join in their revelry," the snarling demon said. His voice was deep and somehow slightly ominous. "Look how much fun everyone is having," the sprite said. "I don't know how you can just stand to the side in the face of such merriment." "Do you really think they're having fun?" the snarling demon asked. "Of course," the sprite replied. "Look at them laughing." "Is everyone who laughs having fun?" the snarling demon asked. "Why else would someone laugh?" the sprite said. "I think there could be any number of reasons," the snarling demon said. The sprite couldn't think of anything to say to that. Lies, subterfuge, putting on a false face, these are not concepts that sprites are familiar with. However, before it could ask the man anything else, the laughing fox came over and took its hand, leading it back to the mass of dancing people. "Why are you talking to such a dour soul, little sprite?" the laughing fox said, "when there are so many other happy people to talk with?" "He looked so sad in the corner," the sprite said, "and I hate to see someone sad at a party, especially when everyone else seems so happy." "Don't concern yourself with him," the laughing fox said, pulling the sprite deeper into the throng of dancing people. The little sprite felt its spirit soar as it danced, but at the back of its mind, the snarling demon's question still echoed. When I pressed my dear sprite, it confessed that it was quite unsure how much time passed as it was dancing there in that hall, for there were no windows and none of the others present seemed to get tired or hungry. Eventually, the curiosity was too much for the little sprite, and it flew up above everyone's head to find the snarling demon. But when it looked to the corner where it had first seen him, it was quite empty. Frantically, the sprite scanned the room, but the snarling demon was nowhere to be found. "Come back, little sprite," the laughing fox said, stretching her arms out towards the sprite. "Where did the man in the corner go?" the sprite asked. "The one with the snarling demon mask." I don't know anyone with a mask like that, the laughing fox said, sounding a little perturbed. Why on earth would anyone wear such a thing? The disgust in her voice was palpable. But you must have seen him when you came for me over in the corner, the sprite said. You were just resting by yourself in the corner, the laughing fox said. Now come dance with us again. But when you got me, you asked why I was talking to such a dour soul, the sprite said, beginning to feel anxious. Surely you must remember. Why do you say such silly things when you should be laughing and dancing with us? The laughing fox said, but her voice sounded a bit strained. But why is everyone laughing? The sprite asked. Because they're having fun, the laughing fox said, her voice becoming firmer. Why else would they laugh? I don't know, said the little sprite, but I think that man does. Well, surely anyone who thinks like that isn't worth speaking to, the laughing fox said. Now come and dance with us. This is your party after all. But why is the party for me? I just don't understand what could possibly be so special about me that so many people I don't know would throw a party for me, the sprite said. You're wearing the ring, the laughing fox said. The master of this house made that ring special for you. That is all I need to know you're special. Confused, the sprite looked down at the ring around its wrist, but instead of the plain band that it remembered from before, it was covered in an intricate pattern of lines that seemed to glow. It was at this point that the wrongness of the evening settled on the little sprite, a grim foreboding that made its heart sink. This place and these people were not as they appeared. That's the end of this chapter of Frazzeldow's Horribly Dreadful Tales. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and comment below. If you'd like just the written or audio versions of this story, you can find them at Wattpad and SoundCloud respectively. Links in the description below.